Hello and welcome back to my channel The Bleach Fanfiction. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the final part of What If Ichigo Time Traveled by iamAdisco. So give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future. So let's get into the fanfic. Yamamoto's office. Yamamoto was looking at the orange-haired man in front of him. Unknown to the young man, he'd been at the meeting Ichigo had with the Rayo. Truthfully, the old man didn't know what to think. Here was a youth who'd been forced to grow up way before his time. Yet his power was so destructive that he'd been able to annihilate a fully empowered Juhabak who was fused with the Rayo. Yamamoto still felt shivers when he thought about the sheer power Juhabak had commanded before he was sealed away. It was mere luck that they even managed to seal him anyway. And the man had unsurprisingly found a way to escape the seal, and was probably amassing an army as they spoke. Yamamoto sighed. His Shinigami weren't war-ready. He shot a speculative look towards Ichigo. "You know, Gramps, I knew you were at the meeting. Can we get to the point? I still have to reseal my Ryatsu, and it's getting late. Kaien wanted to have dinner at home to celebrate my Bankai." Yamamoto blinked at the casual tone that this infant used to refer to him. He was just about to reprimand him, but decided against it. Yamamoto rubbed his forehead, frustrated. He decided to get to the point. "You're a war hero, Shiba. And you have Bankai. I am willing to wager that more than half the captains want you instated as soon as possible. So, infant, do you want to take over as the captain of the 10th Division?" Ichigo blinked at the offer, and a thoughtful look overcame his features. Personally, Yamamoto thought this a win-win situation. He'd have a transcendent hybrid under his command, where he could keep an eye on him. And Ichigo could train his division to be war-ready, which he undoubtedly would. Ichigo seemed to agree. "I accept. Though, I advise you to test Byakuya as well in a few months. He's on the verge on achieving Bankai, and he will have mastered it by then." Yamamoto's mouth curled slightly in a slight smirk, the only sign of his satisfaction with Ichigo's decision. He clapped his hands, calling in a lower-ranked Shinigami who was holding a captain's Haori with the insignia of the 10th Division on its back. Ichigo raised an eyebrow sardonically, but didn't comment. "Welcome to the Godai 13, Captain Shiba Kurosaki Ichigo. You may leave," Yamamoto said as he handed Ichigo his Haori. The orange-haired took it with a bow, and turned to leave. "Oh, I almost forgot. Keep an eye on Ikamaru-jin, would you?" "Bye, Gramps." Yamamoto blinked at the remark. If he remembered correctly, Ikamaru was the third seat of the 5th Division, currently away on a mission in the living world. And didn't Shiba mention something about him being a double agent, and as sneaky as a snake? The old man sighed. He was getting too old for this. Good thing he had caught someone who might be able to take over after him. "Shiba Mansion. Congratulations on achieving Bankai." "Oh, I am so proud." "Wait, is that?" Kaien's boisterous exclamation was put to a halt as he stared at his brother. So were the rest of the surprise party attenders. In addition to Shunsui, Jishiro, Yoruchi, and Shinji, there was Urahara, Zaraki, Jinrei, and Byakuya in attendance. Ichigo smiled ruefully while he gave the news. "Say hello to the newest captain of the Godai 13, Fukutecho Shiba," the orange-haired man counted to 3 before it seemed to sink in. Kaien jumped 3 feet and then engulfed Ichigo in a bear hug. "Captain? Oh, my baby brother just 32 and already a captain. I bet you'll be the best captain ever. No offense, Captain Yukitake." As Kaien rambled on, Ichigo was slowly turning blue from lack of oxygen. He frantically waved his arms, causing Shunsui and Shinji to snort in laughter. Byakuya finally took pity on his best friend and tapped Kaien's shoulder. The man turned around, not yet letting go of Ichigo. Kaien-san, you're kind of strangling him." Byakuya said slowly, as if still waiting for Kyan to realize it by himself. Kyan yelped and let go. Ichigo coughed, trying to catch his breath. Byakuya rubbed his back. Sorry about that, Ichigo. Now, a toast to my brother. The youngest man to become a captain. Cheers. As everyone raised their glasses, Kyan decided to take a back seat and see what happened between his brother and the Kichiki heir. This seemed to be interesting. As the party went on, Ichigo got reacquainted with his old friends. To everyone's surprise, Ichigo got well along with both Kisuke and Shinji. The three of them were on first-name basis by the end of the night. Kyan watched Kisuke warily, sending him suspicious glances every now and then. The Shiba clan head didn't trust Urahara with his cousin. The only reason he tolerated the scientist was because Yoruichi was one of Kyan's friends and somehow, Kisuke's best friend. Kyan had initially thought that Urahara was the most creepiest man alive, until he met the 12th Division 3rd Seat Kuratsuchi. Kyan shuddered. If Urahara was creepy, that man was insane. Kyan dreaded to think about what kind of gross experiments he would try to do on his cousin. Protective instincts now on high alert, Kyan stalked towards the trio of Shinji, Kisuke and Ichigo. Ichigo looked surprised when Kyan decided to intrude. Ichigo, Hirako Taicho, Urahara. How nice to see you three get along. Urahara, can I have a word with you? Not even waiting for the response, Kyan dragged the surprised man in a secluded corner. Urahara, clearly perplexed, asked why he had been dragged away. Kyan introduced the man to the glare of doom. Urahara, I don't care if you're a captain, or whatever. If you ever hurt my cousin I will kill you. Slowly. I will even achieve Bankai just to do that. So watch yourself. And keep that thing you call a third seat away from Ichigo. Or else. Urahara gulped at the threat, and nodded frantically. Kyan smirked. He wasn't a Fukuteicho for nothing after all. When they walked back to the room, they saw that Ichigo had been joined by Shunsui and Jushiro. Kyan blinked, pleasantly surprised that Ichigo was finally getting along with his captain's best friend. He made a beeline for them. Jushiro seemed to be saying something. And I want to thank you. Without you, I would still be in and out of an infirmary. Now, I can finally train again. How can I thank you? Ichigo was reddening slightly from Jushiro's genuine kindness, and Kyan struggled not to grin. Shunsui had no such inhibitions, as he made, noises at Ichigo's admittedly cute expression. Ichigo glared at the 8th Division captain, to which he replied with a mocking bow. Seemingly seeing Shunsui as a lost case, Ichigo turned his attention back at Jushiro. Yukitake Taicho, I am touched by your offer, but truly, I was just a messenger. I am sure someone would have noticed after a while that the humans had made several advances in the field of medicine. Hearing Ichigo's response made Kyan snort. His brother was too humble. Apparently, Shunsui seemed to agree. Oh, please, don't pull that humble thing. We both talk to Resta regularly, and she told us that Soul Society's medical science is light years behind humans. She's been trying to learn all about it in the last year or so, and she seems frustrated that she missed out on so much. I think you deserve everyone's thanks in that regard. Ichigo seemed surprised to hear Shuinsui's agreement, and bowed his head as a thanks for the compliment. An idea came to him. Then I will take you up on your offer, Yukitake-san. As a return to my favor, could you please teach me about how to rune a division? Yukitake seemed pleased, as he shook Ichigo's hand. Of course, Ichigo-san. Oh, and please, call me Ju. Ichigo smiled a minuscule one in return and Kyan grinned. His cousin would do just fine. Captain's meeting. Ichigo looked around himself. He was attending his first ever captain's meeting. Well, in this timeline anyway. In his past, the orange-haired man had sort of become a captain, though he never was officiated. And his division was mainly consisting of viserts and exiled captains, plus his human friends. The unofficial division was led by Ichigo for almost 13 years. 13 years of camaraderie he would never forget. Ichigo's heart ached when he thought about his division's destruction. It had taken Aizen 3 years to dismantle them. The final nail in the coffin was when the evil man sent 1,000,000 modified hollows after Ichigo's division. His men and women were good, excellent even, but in the end they fell. Unfortunately, Ichigo had been occupied with Aizen himself, who'd come out of nowhere and begun a fight. Ichigo had been puzzled, but had not had much time thinking about Aizen's motivations for the sudden visit. He found out soon enough, as an injured Urahara limped into their fighting ground. The shopkeeper didn't say anything, but the broken look in his eyes told Ichigo enough. Aizen was very lucky to have survived that day. Ichigo brought himself out of his reverie and focused on the present meeting. Everyone had welcomed him with open arms into their ranks, having witnessed his immense power when he'd fought Aizen. There had been no official ceremony where the captains would judge him or his bankai either. Apparently defeating a wannabe god was enough proof of his prowess. Yamamoto tapped the floor, announcing that the meeting was in session. It is nice to see we all have recovered from the wounds we unknowingly dealt each other. We have only one pre-sun to thank our victory for, and that is the newest addition to the captains. Captain of the 10th Division, Shiba Ichigo. Here, the old man sent a nod of acknowledgement to Ichigo, who bowed his head. Yamamoto continued. This meeting also has another purpose. The Soul King has informed me of a possible war brewing on the horizon. Although we may have time to prepare for it, we cannot be slacking off. In the last couple of centuries, the level of power for a normal Shinigami has been dwindling. Even you captains cannot compare to the power of your predecessors. And you have been enjoying these times of relative peace. That's why we had so much trouble imprisoning Kuchiki Kuga. If you were up to the old standard, you would have caught him in hours. Instead it cost us thousands of lives and months of time. Gentlemen, all of you are to start a strict training regime. The war is going to be harsh, if the Rayo's warnings are anything to go by. Our enemy is strong. And he has his own army. We need to be prepared. The silence that enveloped the room was deafening. Ichigo was surprised that the old man had decided to inform them about Johabok and his plans, though indirectly. But the orange-haired man was grateful nevertheless. It was true that the Shinigamis of today were below par, and that had shown during the wars. A stricter training regime may not be the solution for the war, but it would certainly help. The silence was suddenly breached as Shunsui let out a loud groan. Ichigo rolled his eyes. The man hated training. And working. And just being sober in general. It was a wonder for Ichigo that Shunsui had been such an efficient captain-commander during the Quincy War. Everyone else seemed to be alarmed by the news, but a determined glint quickly showed itself in their eyes. Ichipo approved. Jushiro cleared his throat, catching everyone's attention. I was just wondering how we are going to juggle our own training, and instructing our division. And how are we going to prevent anyone from dying when we unleash our Ryatsu? 13 captain-level Shinigami fully released won't have a good effect on the surrounding souls. Yukate's questions were met with pensiveness. Ichigo intervened, bringing the attention back to himself. Well, if I may. I think we need to prioritize, and, my bad, but I'm too lazy to fix that, our divisions. Us captains will likely survive an attack from the enemy, but the members of our division may not. So I suggest a morning session, and a late afternoon session, where we observe each and every one of our division members, and help them on a personal level. I believe many have the potential to achieve bankai, especially the lieutenants. We have to put our training on hold until the 12th develops a Ryatsu concealing field strong enough to hold our combined Ryatsu. When we come to that stage, we can put together a training schedule that suits everyone. Ichigo's suggestion seemed to impress and surprise many of the captains who didn't know him. He fought down a scowl. He hated being taken for a muscle head with a strong set of morals. The orange-haired man had finished med school with top marks, at the same time as he had been fighting for the continuation of life in the universe. He thought he deserved at least some credit for that. But his Shinigami friends continued to underestimate his intelligence, until one day he'd put his foot down, and told them in no uncertain terms to not take him for an idiot. Or else he was leaving them to fend for themselves. The looks on their faces was something Ichigo would treasure to the end of time. Yamamoto tapped the floor again. A very good suggestion, Shiba Taishu. All in favor? Everyone raised their hands. Yamamoto looked pleased, though it was hard to tell. It is decided then. You will train your divisions until we can set up a field that doesn't let Ryatsu outside. Urahara Taicho, please see that it is done promptly. And your third seat Kuratsuchi is to be fired, and arrested. Apparently he experimented on some hollows and quincies without our knowledge. Not to mention the way he was eyeing Shiba Taishu. Dismissed. Ichigo had turned green at the mentions of Kuratsuchi. If it was one man he hated more than even Juhabak, it was the creep known to the world as Mayuri Kuratsuchi. The man had tried to experiment on Ichigo and various members of his unofficial division. When he brutally murdered by Bambietta, no one shed a tear. Shinji had even thanked the female Quincy. Ichigo was just thankful that Yamamoto was firing the creep. 10th Division Barracks. Fuku Taishu Matsumoto Ranjaku looked over the assembled division impassively, a rare sight. The strawberry blonde was standing next to her new captain. Ranjaku didn't know anything about her new captain, other than the fact that he was incredibly strong, and incredibly smart. Also that he was astoundingly young and a total cutie. Ranjaku would have gone for him, if she didn't have a crush on a certain someone. A certain Jin Ikamaru. Speaking of, he should be back from his solo mission to the human world one of these days. Matsumoto sighed exasperatedly. That man was so frustrating. What was wrong with admitting that he loved her, and be done with it? Honestly, men. Ranjaku shook herself out of her reverie, and focused. Captain Shiba Ichigo seemed to be assessing each and every one of the division members, and vice versa. The 10th Division was a fairly nice division with very few muscle head, who generally opted for the 11th anyway. But they were slightly skeptical of Ichigo. And so was Ranjaku, to be honest. What kind of man achieved Bankai within a year of being inducted? And at such young age as? Well. Ranjaku hadn't even entered PBRTY yet, but here was a fully functional and obviously grown man at the same age. Finally he seemed to have assessed the division long enough. Good morning. I am Shiba Ichigo, your new Taicho. You may refer to me as Shiba Taishu or Ichigo Taishu. Or just Taicho. I don't care as long as you don't disrespect me. Now, I understand that some of you are skeptical of my qualification. But I assure you, I will do my absolute best to ensure that the 10th Division grows as a unit. 'Tis I do swear. Many blinked at the oath, including Ranjaku. But it did seem to lessen their skepticism. Ichigo seemed pleased, before he turned serious again. Now, the Captain Commander has ordered that our training regime gets more efficient. A war is on its way. And we must prepare. We are going to train 10 times harder, and we are going to do it together. We will a 4-hour training session from 4 a.m. till I will assist every one of you, and try to help you out. You have all the potential to achieve Bankai, and though it may differ in power, each and every Bankai, and at each and every Zanpakuto is unique. Speaking of, a Zanpakuto is not a tool. It is our eternal companion, and it to be treated as such. If I ever hear anyone refer to their Zanpakuto as a tool, they will find themselves in a different division. The glare and threatening Ryatsu was enough reassurance for Ranjaku that her captain meant business. She was impressed. And a little scared, but mostly impressed. Ichigo continued, seeing that his message had sunk in. After the morning session, we will do our duties as Shinigami. That means patrols. What is to be noted is that a Shinigami is now only going to patrol a town for a couple of hours, and not weeks. Reason being our requirement to all of us being present for the afternoon session, which will begin at 4 p.m., and continue till dinner. Anyone who misses the training sessions is to be assigned a shitty job, most likely cleaning the toilets of the 11th, gathering reports from the 12th and so forth. Do I make myself clear? The threatening aura was back, and everyone nodded frantically. Ranjaku pitied the poor buggers. We will begin our training tomorrow. 4 a.m., prompt. Hell butterflies will tell you where you are to be after that. Dismissed. Matsumoto Fukutecho, 3rd Seat Hisagaya. My office, please. As the division went off muttering about the unfairness of it all, Ranjaku sent a questioning look towards Toshiro, who shrugged. They followed Shiba Taishu into the office. Matsumoto was surprised to note that it had already been cleaned of the daily paperwork. Ichigo gestured for them to sit. I want the two of you to try for Bankai. Minio make. Kaien held back tears as he walked out of the 10th Division barracks. He'd disguised himself and attended his baby brother's 1st Division briefing as captain. The Shiba clan head couldn't be prouder. His happiness disappeared when he remembered the elders' meeting he had to attend. Meanwhile, a very angry Shiba Kokoto paced the council room. Where is he? 10th Division, 50 years later. Toshiro was sitting quietly in his office, reviewing some reports. A badge gleamed from his arm, signifying his rank as vice captain. During the 50 years after Ichigo's induction as a captain, the white-haired Shinigami had grown both in power and in body. Standing at an impressive 5 feet 11 inches, the Fukutecho was truly handsome. The reason of his growth was unsurprisingly his captain. Toshiro's lips twitched into a smile as he remembered their first meeting. Flashback. Toshiro stared. As did the normally ditzy blonde. They couldn't believe their own ears, though the newly instated captain's demand was a bit unbelievable. Unsurprisingly, it was Ranjaku who first responded. I beg your pardon, but what the F did you just say? Toshiro winced. Matsumoto only cursed when she was in distress, and you don't want to distress the vice captain. Ever. She was kind of like Shiba Kakaku in that regard. Just more powerful. The orange-haired man seemed to be unfazed, though, as if Matsumoto's swirling Ryatsu wasn't alarming at all. Toshiro felt his respect for the man go up a notch. The man finally responded. I said I want the two of you to achieve Bankai. Please. Ichigo raised his hand in a halting motion, cutting off Matsumoto's oncoming rant. I know it may seem like a big ask. But be assured, you both have the potential for it. I know that you, Fukutecho, are in touching distance of materializing your Zanpakuto. Unfortunately, you don't seem so keen on taking on your Zanpakuto. Laziness, I guess. That has to be changed immediately. Or there will be consequences. Understood. The prodigy released some Ryatsu of his own, underlining his point. Matsumoto seemed discontent, but nodded, not wanting to fight someone obviously powerful. Toshiro was definitely impressed. Captain Shiba seemed satisfied with the answer, as he pulled his Ryatsu down. He turned towards the white-haired Shinigami. Now, 3rd Seat Hitsugaya. You were lauded as a genius yourself, and I believe you graduated a bit over a decade ago, yes? Well, I can for the life of me not understand why you haven't achieved Bankai yet. You clearly have the potential as it's simmering beneath your skin. It's time you woke up from your complacency. Both you and Fukutecho Matsumoto will join me in a training session from 8 p.m. till 10 p.m. Kuchiki Byakuya will also be joining us, as he is close to achieving Bankai as well, though it may take him a year or two to fully control it. Now, any questions? Toshiro was stunned by the captain's vehement belief in him. Meanwhile, Ranjaku took the opportunity to ask Ichigo one question that had been niggling on both their minds. But Captain, what will happen when we both have achieved Bankai? Ichigo smirked. The strongest of you will overtake as vice-captain. Other than that, we are going to train. Achieving Bankai is one thing. Perfecting it is another. You will learn to synchronize with your Zanpakuto, and to truly know the meaning of Bankai. Ranjaku seemed to ponder, before finally nodding resolutely. Well, then we'll meet at 8 p.m. sharp tomorrow. She left with a bow. Toshiro lingered. Ichigo raised his eyebrows in query. Toshiro cleared his throat. Ah, Captain, I wanted to ask you something. Ichigo stared at the third seat. Toshiro coughed lightly. As you can see, I'm a bit challenged vertically. And I was wondering if you had any tips, since you, well, are fully grown despite being so young, and, well. Toshiro was red from his chest to his ears. Ichigo decided to take pity on him. It will come as your power matures. After that you can practically choose the age you want to look. I'm pretty sure the Captain Commander has chosen to look like an old man to fool his less intelligent foes, as Captain Unohana is almost as old as him. Now, I think you have some paperwork to do. Toshiro, still a little embarrassed, thanked Ichigo and went back to his office. He had a feeling the years under him would be interesting. End flashback. How right the white-haired Shinigami had been. 50 years under Ichigo had changed the 10th Division, and the Godiai 13 as a whole. Toshiro didn't expect anything else. The man exuded an aura of power, and his sheer presence demanded respect. His captaincy had led the 10th to be the strongest and well-oiled division in the whole of the Godiai. This was repeatedly proven by tournaments held between the divisions. Before Ichigo, the 10th always landed on either the 7th or 8th position. But after the orange-haired man had taken over, they had shot to the top. Nearly all the 20 seated members had mastered their shirkai, besides achieving it. The other members were divided between those who had mastered Zanjutsu, Hakuta and Ho-Ho as an art, and those who were proficient in all of these areas, but experts in Kido. The other captains often pondered over the reason of Ichigo's massive success. Toshiro snorted. It was simple really. While the rest of the captain except Yukitake, had created a barrier around them, though intentionally or unintentionally was another matter, Ichigo let his walls down. A division member could ask him for technical advice and emotional help. Ichigo didn't differ between himself and the rest of the division. He saw them as equals. And he made that clear to everyone. Just because you were ranked, didn't mean that you were more valuable. Everyone was equal, and those who said otherwise were in for a harsh lesson. Toshiro winced as he remembered one particularly arrogant seated officer. The man lorded over the lower-ranked personnel, pulling his rank on every single thing. Ichigo had warned him, but after he didn't listen, he had the man demoted to cleaning the 11th Division's toilets. By hand. Toshiro didn't think he'd smell anything more disgusting in his life. But there was one thing he hated about Ichigo. He didn't care about himself. Toshiro knew that Ichigo was bordering on a collapse. And there was nothing he could do about it. The brush in his hand snapped. Toshiro hated not being able to save his captain from his biggest enemy. Himself. Yuhu. Toshiro-chan. Oh my, put away that paperwork. We have much more important things to do. Toshiro's thoughts were interrupted by the third seat of the 10th, Matsumoto Ranjaku. The white-haired man sighed. So much for peace of mind. Irritated he responded. What could possibly seem important that you deem it worthy to cut paperwork? Don't you remember what captain had you do last time? Do you really want to clean up vomit in the 4th division? Again. At Toshiro's reminder, Ranjaku shuddered, before turning serious. I saw the captain stumbling today. He never stumbles. Ever. You know that. This is getting serious. We have to act. Toshiro stifled a gasp at Ranjaku's revelation. They really had to act fast. The white-haired Shinigami was sure that Ichigo hadn't slept in months if he had stumbled. The man who could make sitting down look graceful stumbling was a really bad sign of his health. Toshiro thought hard, before he finally got an idea. Operation Get Ichigo Some Rest, begin. 3 hours later, 10th Division Captain's Office. Ichigo sighed. He had approximately 95 reports to go through, before he had to oversee the afternoon session. And after that he had to train with the captains and those who had achieved Bankai. And since there was definitely going to be reports to do by then, he'd get no sleep till the morning session. Ichigo knew he was running low on energy. Hell, even his Zanpakuto spurts were feeling the strain of being awake he didn't even now. Then was the strain of conducting 3 training sessions every day. Even though Ichigo never powered up, he could still feel himself slipping. And he had a few bruises to prove the fact that he needed a break. Fast. But at the same time, he couldn't afford to slack. Juhabak and his army of Quincy's would be powerful, and the Gotei 13 were nowhere near the level of their opponent. There was also something else keeping Ichigo up at night. Ever since he had come back in time, Kyan had trusted him implicitly. Ichigo felt guilty every time he had to lie to his brother. He had private talks with Isshin whenever he visited, and the guard had helped him ease some of his problems. But that was clearly not enough to let go of the guilt. Suddenly the door opened to reveal the odd assortment of Ichigo's friends. The orange-haired man blinked, trying to figure out what could have brought Kyan, Byakuya, Toshiro and Ranjaku to pay him a sudden visit. As expected, Kyan was the first to speak up. The man looked slightly angry. So Ichigo, what the F are you trying to do to yourself? Ranjaku-san and Tachan just told me about how you have been spending the last 10 months without sleep. You're lucky you're so strong, or I would have knocked you out myself. You are going to take a vacation. Clan head's orders. Now, please explain to me why you feel the need to do this to yourself. Kyan was practically foaming at the mouth at the end of his rant. Ichigo was slightly stunned by the onslaught of orders and scolding. He sent a half-hearted glare towards Toshiro, who just shrugged and cast a look in Ranhiku's direction. Just as Ichigo was about to shoot back at Kyan that he was able to take care of himself, Byakuya decided to add his 2 cents. For once I agree with Kyan-sama. I have to admit I noticed you slipping up quite a bit yesterday when we sparred. Not to mention the fact that you almost lost. Though it would do wonders to my self-confidence, we both know that even though you were in Shirkai and I was in my Bankai, the difference between us is astronomical. You haven't activated your Bankai ever. Not even when battling the Captain Commander in Bankai. I am disappointed to see you waste yourself like this. Ichigo sent a slightly betrayed look towards Byakuya. Kyan now looked ready to unleash his Bankai on Ichigo. Ichigo could practically see the steam of his ears. The orange-haired man sighed, and counted to 10 inwardly, while debating what to do. While I appreciate your concern, I can take of myself. I will rest when I haven't got any immediate responsibilities, like paperwork, division manage-in, and train-in. A scoff cut off Ichigo. The orange-haired man sent a surprised look towards Toshiro, who looked irritated. The room's temperature seemed to drop a bit, something that Ichigo minded. He was running a light fever, and adding a cold to that wouldn't do anyone good. Cut the bullshit, Taicho, was the white-haired man's blunt reply to Ichigo's admittedly half-butted explanation. Ichigo was surprised. Toshiro had never been vocal, or prone to cursing. But this was the man who spat in Juhabaka's face when the Quincy had asked him to join the Quincy cause. On his the door of death, mind you. Toshiro continued, seemingly oblivious to the looks he was receiving from the habitants of the room. Though Kyan's eyes held a glint of approval. Matsumoto can do at least half of the paperwork. I can handle the training. You know this. We know this. I have been your Fukutechu for almost 50 years. I know when something is bothering you. And I know that you immerse yourself in work to escape the problem. Well, this is it. You have to face your problems. And let us help. Our expectant pair of eyes fell on him. Ichigo made a decision. He didn't want to lie anymore. Not to his family, or his best friends. With a firm resolve, Ichigo stood up. Might as well do it. I am tired of hiding. Come with me, I'd rather not do it twice. With that Ichigo walked to the 1st Division barracks, having called upon all the captains. The Fursum trailed after him, exchanging confused glances. What had Ichigo been hiding? Captain's meeting room. Byakuya sent Ichigo a glance. The orange-haired man had trained the Kuchiki Lord achieve Bankai in 3 years. Shortly thereafter Kuchiki Jinrei had resigned, to nobody's surprise, and let Byakuya take over both as clan head, and as captain for the 6th. Those 3 Yurtas had solidified their friendship, and Byakuya considered himself to be Ichigo's brother just as Kaien did. But Byakuya also considered himself to know Ichigo. And the raven-haired man had always known that Ichigo hid something. Byakuya didn't bring it up, allowing Ichigo to come to terms with his secrets, and hoping that one day the orange-haired man would let his best friend in. It seemed like today was that day. Ichigo had even called a captain's meeting. No surprise there, as Ichigo considered everyone to be his friends. And vice versa. Kaien and Toshiro looked a little confused as to whether or not they were allowed there, as they were vice-captains, but Ichigo just motioned for them to sit down. Soon everybody was seated, and small talk of the reason for an emergency was made. Even Yamamoto was there, sending knowing looks towards Ichigo. Byakuya thought. So the captain commander knew. Ichigo looked supremely uncomfortable, before he cleared his throat, and began to speak. Good evening. I am sure you're all wondering what we're here for today. As it was I who called this meeting, I want you to know that this is a more personal matter than a military one. You see, I consider you all to be my friends, yes, even you, Kamamura Taishu, and I want to tell you all of a secret I have been bearing for the past 50 years. Pin-drop silence greeted Ichigo's admission. The captains exchanged glances, though Kyoraku Shunsui looked unperturbed for some reason. Byakuya was barely containing himself from yelling at Ichigo to get on. Which he did. Get on, that is. It all started when I was 15, living like a normal teenager in Karakura Town, Japan, though one with exceptionally high ryatsu. The year was 2005, approximately 100 from now. The silence was deafening, before it was broken by a quiet laugh from Hirako Shinji. Good one, Ichigo. I don't know when you got into pranking, but you have to do better that. Several others looked to be in agreement with the eccentric captain of the 5th. Ichigo's expression turned stormy, and he rose to his feet. I'm not lying, you shithead. If you just heard me out, you'd understand. This was why I didn't nat to tell any and dash. Before Ichigo could finish his rant, he staggered. Kaien, who was the closest to the orange-haired man, leapt to support him, only to jump back, as if burned. Ichigo fell back into his seat, looking distressed. Shinji looked worried. So did everybody else for that matter. Kaien seemed to have lost his voice. He's burning up. Anahona, Taicho. Everybody looked shocked, as Anahona set on to checking Ichigo's temperature. The healer looked worried, as she revealed what she'd found. He's running a very high fever, 108 degrees at least, and he seems to have had it for quite a while. He needs to be hospitalized ASAP. Byakuya blinked in shock, but it soon turned to anger. Why hadn't the idiot said anything? Everybody's attention was again snapped as Ichigo sat up, obviously struggling. No, I won't go to the 4th just yet. I have to tell you my story. I am tired of holding it in. Just let me tell it, please, was the man's request. Anahona seemed conflicted, before she nodded. Ichigo took a deep breath, before launching into his story. As I was saying, I was a 15-year-old teen, able to speak to ghosts because of my high ryatsu. But since I had no control over my power, as I didn't know of its existence, I attracted hollows like a magnet. My high Ryatsu was a result of my parents' union, one Masaki Kurosaki, one of the last pure-blood Quincy's, and my father, Isshin Kurosaki, better known as Shiba Isshin, a member of the Royal Guard. They met because of a hollow which Aizen had experimented on. The captains were taken on a roller coaster of a journey of revelations. Byakuya had to stifle gasps of shock several times. Others were not as good with self-control. Especially Kamamura seemed to be surprised when Ichigo revealed that the captain of the 7th had let go of his disguise in the future, and had been accepted for his looks. The man, revealed to be a werfox, took off his disguise then. His belief in the truth of Ichigo's seemingly crazy story strengthened when the orange-haired man just gave a weak thumbs up. And then Kisuke shoved a small black box into my hands, and the next thing I know, I wake up on a futon in a stranger's house. Ichigo finished his story, letting the captains mull over the information he'd let them in on. Shunsui just smiled, as if one of the greater mysteries of the universe had been solved. Ah, now I see why your aura put me off. Really, I should's guessed that the strange Ryatsu you emitted was because of your hollow Zanpakuto and the watered-down version of the Quincy King in your head, not because you were a demon sent from hell to exterminate the existence of the Soul Society. Ichigo, and the rest of the room, blinked, before smirking, as if remembering something. Knowing what they did he probably was. You were always a right bstrd Shunsui, even after Juhabak cut off your tongue with that, the orange-haired man fainted. And all hell broke loose. Courtesy Kaien, of course. 4th Division, Ichigo's room, 3 days later. One captain of the 10th Squad opened his eyes blearily. The last thing he remembered was he'd told his friends of his past. And then fainted. Ichigo frowned. He'd never thought that his light fever was that. Though he'd never had an actual fever to compare with before this, but still, his father had been a doctor, idiot though he was. The prodigious war hero ran a frustrated hand through his hair, which he noticed was in a braid. Now that he noticed, he was wearing different clothes as well. Weird. Ichigo's attention was brought to his surroundings. He immediately noticed Byakuya and Kaien dozing off in chairs beside his bed. Ichigo was slightly shocked to see them there. The war hero was a bit nervous to confront them, if he was honest. He had lied to Kaien, and the man had taken him in as his brother, though he was related, he'd still lied to him. And swindling a clan head was a crime no matter how you looked at it. And Byakuya. He was Ichigo's best friend. But he was also a version of the man who'd willingly given up his sister for execution. Suddenly the door opened, revealing a slightly disheveled Anahona. The woman looked dead tired, before she noticed that Ichigo was awake. A smile made its way to her face. Ichigo hesitantly smiled. Anahona's smile turned scary. Ichigo flinched inwardly. In his inner world, Shiro cursed colorfully. Ah, Shiba Taishu, you are finally awake. After 3 days of constant healing, and I mean constant, you are finally awake. Do you have any idea what you put your family, friends, division and even your fangirls through? Or for that matter, what you put me through? I thought you died at least 10 times every. I don't know how long you were bearing that fever, but it must have been at least 3 months. And you were terribly underweight as well. Though it might not have shown on your body, you were almost anorexic. Now, you are to take a nice, long vacation. And you will follow my meal plan for the entirety of it. Healer's orders. Am I clear? As the temperature seemed to have dropped to Arctic levels, Ichigo thought it was in his best interest to nod frantically. Which he did. Anahona seemed satisfied, before her visage softened. I know that you have been through a lot, Shiba Taishu. And I know that you are a very independent individual. But everybody needs a shoulder to cry on. Please be aware that you are surrounded by people willing to lend you their shoulder, their sword, and give their life for you. Now, you are to take these medicines. Ichigo hid his surprise from hearing this from Unohana of all of people. A small snort brought the orange-haired man out of his reverie. It seemed like Kyan and Byakuya were awake. Both of them looked dead on their feet. And they weren't even standing. Ichigo felt a pang of guilt. Kyan, Byakuya, I am sorry for what I put you through. And that I lied to you as well, of course, but you have to understand that another snort cut Ichigo's apology off. The Shiba heir sent a nervous look towards Kyan, who looked impassive and unimpressed. Even Byakuya looked a little disappointed. Ichigo's heart fell. I am not disappointed that you didn't tell me about your sickness and about your past. But what does piss me off is that you don't trust us enough to tell if you are having a good or a bad day. That you don't take care of yourself. That you won't stop until you are on the ground bleeding from 100 wounds. That we can handle it. That we will never abandon you. Kyan was breathing heavily at the end of his rant. Ichigo looked a little lost, and a bit angry. Do you think I wanted to hold it in for so long? Of course I am going to fear losing you. FANFICTION lost everyone. Every single person. Just because I wasn't strong enough to protect them. Because they were my weakness. And both Johabok and Aizen exploited that. You know, I saw the FNG kill my sisters. My sweet, Yuzu and strong, Karen. Do you know what Aizen said before I killed him? Standing knee-deep in the blood of my friends, he told me how he raped my little sister. If you think I didn't tell you because you couldn't handle it, it's because you can't. You don't know how it is to live with a war zone in your head. Pin-drop silence followed Ichigo's statement. Kyan looked shell-shocked. Ichigo breathed deeply, before giving a sarcastic smile. You know, my inner world was appealing, filled with tall buildings. Now it's a wasteland, barely enough to accommodate my spirits. I didn't tell because I thought you couldn't handle it. I know you can't handle it. Everybody went insane at some point. I went on killing sprees bloody enough to land me in hell for eternity. And I don't want to see the same happen. Not again. The time travelers was contorted in grief. The silence was heartbreaking. Byakuya reached out and touched Ichigo's shoulder. You're right. We aren't able to handle that. But we're here for you. Let it all out, Ichigo. Brother. Kyan chipped in. No matter how many wars you've lived through, Ichigo, you'll always be my baby brother. Nothing going to change that. Ichigo stared at them with an anguished look, before he threw his arms around his brothers. And he let it all out. Reo's palace. One linchpin of the worlds was quietly sipping a warm cup of tea. As one would imagine, he had a lot on his mind. But today was a especially headache-inducing day. Not that he got headaches, but he was sure that if he was able to get them, he would have won. The king sighed. Ichigo Kurosaki had finally told his friends of his past, or rather, their alternate fate. But now that Siritii's elite knew about Kurosaki's position as a hybrid, it was only a question of time before the official at Central knew. The king took another sip of his tea. The Central 46 was established to work alongside the Gotei. As the Gotei were purely a military organization, the Central 46 was a supposed government, responsible for organizing districts, food supply, provide education etc. The 46 didn't have any power over the Gotei. And the Gotei didn't have any power over 46 either. The king had designed the two organizations to work together. But over time the 46 had assumed power over the Gotei. The Reo grimaced. Truth to be told, he hadn't been too angry at the 46 in the beginning. The Gotei had begun to be too reckless with their missions, and even the lowliest of the Shinigami's head was filled with arrogance. At first the Reo had approved of the 46 reigning in the Gotei. He had thought that it would improve the Shinigamis, and for a while, it did. But after the early bloom, nothing seemed to happen. Instead of walking forward, the Siratii just became stagnant. And the Reo blamed that the old geezers were too stuck in their ways. They feared change. This fear had ultimately transferred over to the Godii. And this fear could lead to a disaster if the 46 heard of Ichigo's disposition. The king absently refilled his cup, by magic of course. A thoughtful expression came over the Reo's face. As the king he had full, absolute control over both the Godii and he could also appoint out members, for 46, or captains if he wished to. And he had the power to fire members as well. An idea came to the king. And he smiled. Central was in for a change. And a shock. Not necessarily in that order. Captain's meeting, 2 weeks after Ichigo's breakdown. Ichigo cast a quick look around himself, exchanging smiles with his fellow captains. He was truly happy that his friends has accepted the truth about his past. They had all grown closer, and the training sessions had been much more fruitful. Maybe it was the knowledge of their deaths, the imminent bloody war, and how Ichigo had been forced to fight regardless had hit them hard, but nevertheless, it was a welcome change. Shunsui, who'd gained notoriety for skipping the captain's training, had also been participating recently. The eccentric had mostly been sparring with Jushiro and Ichigo, as they were the only ones able to keep up with the easygoing man. Shunsui was a powerhouse, his technique was flawless. And Ichigo was very happy to call himself his student. Ichigo recalled the training session from yesterday. Shunsui had commented offhandedly about how Ichigo's fighting seemed to have used the 8th's captain style as a base, to which Ichigo had wryly replied that in his timeline, it was Shunsui who had taught him how to wield both his swords simultaneously. Shunsui had seemed thoughtful, before replying that his counterpart had done a good job. Ichigo snorted. What a way to compliment oneself. The orange-haired man was shaken out of his thoughts as Yamamoto announced the meeting to begin. Ichigo sighed inwardly. Meetings like these were pure hell. Everybody was required to report the bi-weekly happenings at their respective divisions. Surprise, surprise, military organizations didn't have that many fun activities planned or done. Shinji was often spotted nodding off. Shunsui had no such shame, and he just sprawled in his seat, going to sleep if the occasional snores were any indication. Ichigo, on the other hand, tried to concentrate on what was being said. He had found that paying attention more often than led to useful information that either being omitted, or just ignored. Especially Yamamoto's speeches were loaded with hidden info, and after 50 years of listening to the man's coded speeches, Ichigo considered himself a pro at getting vital info out of the tight-lipped old man. Before long it was time for Yamamoto to speak, but before the old man could get around to dish out hidden info, he was interrupted by a bright light appearing in the middle of the room. Ichigo shielded his eyes, preparing to face whatever that might come out. Fortunately it seemed like it was someone friendly with the Soul Society. Ichigo blinked as he both rubbed his eyes free of residual light and as he took in the sight in front of him. Reo-sama, those words seemed to have an instant effect on the room, as every captain hurried to kneel before the king. The Reo just waved a hand, dismissing it. Yamamoto cleared his throat. Welcome, Your Majesty. If I may ask, what brought you here? The room was waiting for the Reo's answer. The king smiled. Oh, a certain thing caught my attention. You see, when I first established this system, I gave an equal amount of authority to both the Central 46 and the Godii, but for some time, the Godii has been subservient to the So. As an equalizer, I've decided to make a certain change. I've decided that a captain of Godii will now serve as member of the He will have the same rights as a regular member, as well as the authority of a captain. This captain will be Shiba Ichigo. Stunned silence met the Reo's announcement. The king looked smug, before a slightly irritated expression overtook his features. Shigekuni, I thought you were aware that the Central has no power over the captains of Godii, or whose things are done. Why have you allowed them to walk over you? I am truly disappointed. See that it changes pronto. Now if you excuse me, I have other duties to attend. With that, he was gone. The elite warriors of Siratii stared gobsmacked at each other. Shunsui asked the important question. Did Yamaji just get scolded by the Reo? Oh, congratulations by the way, Ichigo. Needless to say, Yamamoto was not happy. Ichigo on the other hand, seemed to have frozen. From his seat, Byakuya snorted. He didn't envy Ichigo at all. Shiba Mansion, later the same day. Kaien and Ichigo Shiba were sitting together in the meeting room of their mansion. Ichigo had of course told his brother of his current status as a newly inducted member of the C-46, or was it 47 now? Kaien had taken the news surprisingly calmly and reacted with the seriousness that is demanded of a clan head, something Ichigo was thankful for. After Ichigo's confession, Kaien had turned very serious in regards to his training. The man had achieved Bankai a few decades ago, but was only focusing on mastering it now. It reassured Ichigo of the fact that his time traveling was truly changing things for the better. Though the Soul Society still stood no chance against the Quincy's, they were much better prepared for them. Ichigo thought that they could be fully prepared for the war in the remaining 100 years before the war would break out. But the orange-haired captain's new status was an unexpected responsibility. He saw the positives with this position, of course. This newly acquired membership would prevent any attempts that the 46 would have done for Ichigo's eviction from Soul Society because of his Hollow and Quincy powers. And it would spread Ichigo's influence in the elite community of nobles. Not that he needed that, as the heir of one of the great clans, and as a captain of Godai. The problems of Ichigo's inauguration as a member of Central was that this was politics. And Ichigo was an unknown entity to the old geezers. Not to mention that the 46 hadn't been notified of Ichigo's induction beforehand. That fact alone made him a pariah in the Central. Ichigo was going to be thrown in a virtual cage with hungry bears. The orange-haired man had no experience with the politics of the 46, since the Central had been abolished during the wars, mainly due to being, well, dead. The wars had been fought under martial law enacted by the Godai. This inexperience was the reason for the Shiba brothers' impromptu meeting, aka politics lesson. The reason Ichigo had chosen Kaien as his teacher was simple. Kaien was his clan head, and had been trained in politics since he was out of diapers. And he could direct Ichigo in how to conduct politics in a fashion that befitted the Shiba clan. Contrary to popular belief, the Shiba weren't just a brazen loudmouthed bunch with too much ryatsu for their own good. When it came to politics, the Shibas were pretty cutthroat, as one needed to be. Just remember this. Never lose your cool. Hide your anger behind cold smiles, like the one you use when you get too angry. Also, let your opponent entangle themselves in their own words. Provoke them in such a manner that they ultimately lose it. Don't be too expressive, and I mean that you should lose your scowl, for that. Appear, cool, calm, and unfazed. Don't let anything get to you, and don't let your inexperience show. That is the secret to succeeding. I think you'll be a natural at this as well, going by the way you've been handling the clan's inner politics. Kaien smiled wryly. Ichigo snorted. The clan was Ichigo's family. Central was going to be Ichigo's enemy. The clan's politics had always favored Ichigo, while Central was going to oppose Ichigo's pattern of breathing. The younger Shiba sighed. Oh well, if I mess up too much, I'll just pull a Shunsui and pretend to be hard-headed as F-. That would be hilarious, now that I think about it. Kaien looked scandalized at this. Don't you dare emulate him. You are an heir, and you should act as such in situations like these. Come now, I've arranged some etiquette lessons. Those geezer are so taken by their customs they'll eat you alive if you so much as twitch the wrong way. As the Shiba clan had continued, Ichigo felt his stomach dropping even more. DMN the Reo for doing this to him. On a completely different note, the Reo felt chills going down his spine as he enjoyed observing the aftermath of his penultimate decision. The King of Worlds frowned, but dismissed it as nonsensical. After all, he was the most powerful entity in existence. No one could scare him. Right? Central 46 Chambers, the next day. Yamamoto Shigekuni Genryusai, Suteichu of the Godiai 13, war hero, and the dragon of Suritii, was feeling, dare he say it, gleeful. When the Reo had announced Ichigo to be the newest addition to the 46, he'd initially been shocked and worried. But then he remembered that this was Shiba Ichigo. If anything, it should be the 46 that should be worried. The Suteicho sent a glance at his companion. Yamamoto was generally present at the Central's meetings. His presence alone prohibited many of the members from passing laws that were too harsh on the Godiai, or those that were too noble-friendly. Now, with the Reo's intervention, the Godiai would freely be able to prosper as they should have been. All this thanks to one-time traveling war hero. Yamamoto and Ichigo made themselves comfortable on the seats in the Central's Colosseum. No one had approached them, as the tradition of Central demanded there be no communication before the meeting. Ichigo was sent many a curious glance. Yamamoto had to admit, the young heir truly was an eye-catching sight. With his flowing orange hair braided and slung over his shoulder, his haori flaring around his graceful form, and his sword hanging at his hip, he cut the perfect image for an ideal Shinigami captain. And the fact that he was a well-known heir added the icing on the cake. Yamamoto hid a smirk. He was truly waiting to see Ichigo in action. Those old farts had no idea what would hit them. Finally the meeting was officially commenced. The head of the Central Council, Shinya Ikamu, cleared his throat as he sent Yamamoto and Ichigo an ugly look hidden behind his spectacles. Yamamoto and Shinya had a rivalry, of sorts. When they were young, they had studied the Shinigami arts together. But because Shinya had more inclination towards politics and the like, he'd chosen the 46 as his job. At first, Yamamoto and were like brothers, but as the centuries went, Shinya became more and more conservative and traditionalistic. Which had led to a very public disagreement between the two, consequently replacing their friendship with rivalry. Welcome all. Today we commence the 100,153rd meeting of Central 46, which are, as of yesterday, renamed as the Central 47, as our respected and honorable Reo-sama ordered. That statement, delivered as painstakingly as it was, caused a lot of muttering to erupt. One voice asked hesitantly. "Who is our newest member, Shinya-sama?" The query seemed to physically pain the head as he grimaced lightly before he answered. "Ah, an esteemed captain from the Gotian. Shiba Ichigo, heir of the royal Shiba clan, captain of the 10th Division, noted prodigy. I welcome you to the hall." The obviously forced words had no effect on heir Shiba, as he simply stood to give a speech as was tradition for new members. Just as he was about to speak, one particularly annoying member shot up. Okaya Mumi. The man was pain in the butt, in a physical form, in Yamamoto's generous opinion. Preposterous. We all heard how this man has taken us for fools for the past 50 years. To top it off, he's a hybrid. A monster like him should be put down, not invited in these pure halls. Silence greeted the man's words. Many seemed to agree with Okaya. Ichigo looked unfazed. Yamamoto gave him points for that. Suddenly the hall's temperature seemed to drop. Ichigo seemed to not pay it any attention. Thank you, Okaya-sama, for those kind seemies like you are all familiar with my past, and my genetical disposition as a hybrid. But that does not make me a monster. Nor do I need to be put down, as you so candidly put it. To tell you the truth, I couldn't care less about the Central. I didn't choose, nor did I have any ambition of joining it, but the king's word is law, is it not? Ichigo finished his response with a cold smile. The hall seemed to cool down a bit more. Yamamoto was truly impressed. Ichigo had basically freed himself from following any traditional 46 values with that statement. By saying he was here because of obligation meant that any political schemes wouldn't change anything. Of course, using the king's name was also a brilliant move. Ichigo continued. Sorry about that. As I said earlier, I'm here because I was ordered to, not because I wished. The Ryo has granted me the membership of Central, but also the additional equalizer for me is that I have as much power as the head of the council. The reason for that is simple. For the past half millennium, Central has been using their power where they don't have the right to, in the Godai. Ryo-sama put up with it because you people were actually making progress, but with a galactical war approaching, we don't have time for your dilly-dallying. Scandalized gasps erupted all around, but Ichigo ignored them. The Central 46 were the first to be killed in our time. And they weren't mourned. In fact, strategically speaking, the enemy did us a favor by killing you off, as you would have held us back from even surviving. In the end we lost. But I believe we would have won if you hadn't made incredibly stupid laws regarding the Shinigami training system, and how you demanded paperwork for every single thing. Most Shinigami wasted their lives away trying to get it, and were subsequently cannon fodder. All because 46 old farts couldn't handle a little change. This time, Ichigo's scathing remark didn't provoke, but rather embarrassed the aforementioned old farts. Yamamoto was truly amazed. He'd been trying to get them see the error of their way for centuries, and here was this youngster, ripping their BLNDFLDS away. How dare you? You're an upstart with no respect for your elders. I should have known, yeshibas are cut from the same block anyway. Always respectless, idiotic and arrogant in your ways. The room's temperature, which had been on its way to normal, suddenly dropped 10 degrees. It became difficult to breathe for many of the members, as Ichigo let them feel a piece of his Ryatsu. Yamamoto hid a smirk. Again. Okire Mumi. The patriarch of the Okire clan, known in the black market for your business that provides SEC slaves, no. In fact, didn't you sell your own daughters for the same trade? And then you pretended they had died, abducted by, Shiba Rikichi, who was on to you. Isn't that true? The Shiba heir's voice was void of emotion, and cold as the Arctic. His statement had garnered many shocked expressions, and many looked truly disgusted with the fat lube of tard known as Okiri. Okiri, struggling to breath under Ichigo's wrath, was forced to admit his crimes. Ichigo smiled coldly. SEC trade is punishable by death, isn't it? Well, I, as High Member of the Central, order your execution. I will have the burden of being your executioner. Shinya-sama, if I may. The only thing the head of Central was capable of was nodding. Ichigo reached for his sword. Seeing this, Okiri made a pathetic attempt at fleeing, only succeeding in falling over. There was a slash, faster than anyone but Yamamoto could see, and Okiri Mumi was no more. The message was clear. Don't mess with High Member Shiba Ichigo. Or you'll end up dead. Some Onmitsukido cleared of the body and the blood from its position. A moment of silence passed before Shinya finally managed to speak. An investigation is to be led against the Okiri family immediately. Anything else you would like to discuss, High Member Shiba? Ichigo's cold smile told them that they were in for a long, long day. Yamamoto ordered some food. 10th Division, a few months after Ichigo's induction. Toshiro looked at the clock. 17, that meant he had 5 minutes to prepare the afternoon Ichigo would no doubt be looking forward to. With a sigh he got up and got to work. Ever since the Ryo had instated Ichigo as a high member of C-46, things had changed. To start with, the Siratii had become much more in touch with the modern world OG living. One could say they were somewhat ahead of the humans, as Kisuke Urahara had made a lot of advances that the humans undoubtedly weren't capable of. Now, the people of Siratii had a much better living standard. All thanks to the 10th Division captain. Along with modernizing the Siratii, Ichigo had also forced the C-46 to see the damage they had wrought upon the Rukongai. Toshiro snorted. Apparently the old geezers had simply looked down their nose, and acted all haughty. Ichigo had snapped, losing control of his Ryatsu. The whole of Siratii had felt it. That had been followed by a, how to put it, severe tongue lashing. The bad living conditions had long-time effects on souls, as they left a bad imprint on one's memory. The tortured souls often became criminals when they reincarnated, and subsequently hollows. Not to mention the crime rate in the higher-numbered districts. Toshiro shook his head in disgust. The sheer brutality of the crimes committed had been enough to make one central member vomit. And Ichigo was listened to. Toshiro couldn't say that, for example, Inazuri was a good place to live in, but it was far better than what it had been. At least the kids had shelter. And regular patrols were sent. From what the Fukutecho had heard, Yamamoto had a good laugh over the C-46 position. The white-haired man could swear he'd heard someone cackle once he'd passed the 1st Division barracks. The white-haired lieutenant looked at the clock. 17, Toshiro began the countdown. 3. 1. Bang! Toshiro was the command of his captain. The Fukutecho silently handed the obviously frustrated man his tea, and went back to his work, silently waiting the onslaught. This had somewhat become a habit. Every time there was a C-46 meeting, the orange-haired man would come into his office, demand a cup of tea, fume silently for a couple of minutes, before going on a long spiel about the 40th general stupidity. Emphasis on long and stupidity. In all honesty, Toshiro was astounded that the old geezers were able to function as normal beings with the amount of idiocy that was in place in their brains. The white-haired man's attention was brought back to the resent as he saw that Ichigo tiredly dragged a hand through his hair. That was never a good sign. Toshiro prepared himself. Toshiro, am I stupid? A plain idiot? That's it, insane, said man blinked in surprise. Hesitantly he answered. No, Captain. I would say you are very intelligent. May I ask what brought this on? Oh, I don't know. But for the past 6 months, I have been trying to get my points across to people who are older, more experienced, and evidently, smarter than me. That they don't get my points, must obviously mean that there is something wrong with me, doesn't it? Toshiro winced at the sharp sarcastic edge in that they don't get my points, must obviously mean that there is something wrong with me, doesn't it? Toshiro winced at the sharp sarcastic edge in his captain's voice. This didn't bide well for his ears. Do you want to know what happened today? I had the nerves to suggest that, now that we are actually checking on those unlucky Rukongai BSTRDS, maybe E should offer the children their school and build some infrastructure and sheet. Do you know what they replied? That they didn't any motherfucking funds. Ha! Lack of funds. Like I don't know about all the money they get from their job, and add that to their extracurricular, barely legal, businesses, and you have 45 FNG business empires. Okiri, the BSTRD I executed on my first day, had enough money to support a relatively big country. And he was considered small fry. Motherfucking bureaucrats. Toshiro was stunned at the end of the tirade. Ichigo never swore. Let alone that much. An stunned silence had taken place in the division, indicating that everyone had heard. Toshiro sighed inwardly, before he hesitantly approached the caged lion that was his captain. Do you want more tea? Pour it. Toshiro watched silently as his captain sipped his tea, trying to come up with a suitable topic to talk about. He had never had to deal with an angry, cursing Ichigo before. Luckily he was saved from further trauma as the shoji doors slid to reveal Byakuya Kachiki. The man silently sat down, and Toshiro offered him some tea, which the newly inducted clan head gratefully accepted. Byakuya turned towards Ichigo, who had given no indication of noticing Byakuya's arrival. The Kachiki sighed. I know that they said you off, but was scaring them that much really necessary? And why in the 7 layers of hell did you think that destroying the head of council's chair with him in it would do any good? Byakuya sounded intrigued more than anything else. Even Toshiro raised an eyebrow. Ichigo twitched. Yes, it was necessary. And the old goat fucker was pissing me off. Do you know what he had to say about the children of Rukongai? That they were cannon fodder, unimportant souls with no past or future. Apparently he doesn't remember the fact that he too comes from the Rukongai. And it's not like he was hurt. The crafty geezer was Yamajiji's training partner after all. A silence fell as Byakuya mulled over the information. Ichigo rose, surprising the occupants of the room. "Want a spar, Kuchiki? With you in a mood to destroy the realm?" "Of course." With that, the two departed, leaving a befuddled Toshiro. He shook his head, and sent a hell butterfly to the fourth. Ichigo was still set off, after all. And they couldn't have the Kuchiki head dying from a spar, could they? Elsewhere. Byakuya felt a chill run down his spine as he watched Ichigo get ready. "This was definitely one of your less wise decisions, Byakuya-sama," his ever-so-faithful Zanpakuto commented. Byakuya rolled his eyes, but couldn't help but agree. Ichigo powered up, and Byakuya winced at the malicious intent in his Ryatsu. Definitely not his best idea. There was probably a bed in the fourth with his nameplate on it. As he saw his best friend get into position, he knew that H was going to be pummeled. Thoroughly. Oh, well, he thought as he drew his sword. Might as well try to enjoy it. Inside his wielder's mind, Senbenzakura winced. Barely 5 minutes into the match, and Byakuya had already entered Bankai, while Ichigo hadn't even drawn his swords, preferring to fight with Kido. This was going to be a long, long day. In the 4th Division barracks, Anahona felt a chill down her spine. Captain's meeting, 1st of July, year 2005 AD. Urahara Kisuke was nervous, and tense. 2 words normally not associated with the eccentric scientist. But the occasion was such that it generated a bit of fear into his heart. As soon as Urahara had found out about the impending rebellion of Hiquincies, he's placed several devices across the 3 universes that would monitor and warn in case of immediate danger. One of the alarms had been activated several years ago, when there was an attack on the Kurosaki Shida family, the last remaining pure-blooded Quincies. Of course he knew the significance of those names, as his photographic memory allowed him to remember almost everything. And that included every single detail of Ichigo Taishu's confession 100 years ago. The attack on the family of the last Quincies had kicked everyone into action. Several high-class Shinigami had been dispatched to deal with the hollows that somehow managed to overpower the Quincies. Of course, being saved by the Shinigami had led the Kurosaki Shida family's views to change, and the family had built a hesitant alliance with the Soul Society. Last he'd heard, their newest heir, Ishida Yuryu, was advancing quite nicely in his powers. But what ultimately had been the consequence of the attack was that the Siritiai's increase in war preparations. The Siritai itself was a fortress, and there were guards stationed everywhere. The citizens of Rukongai were also taken into consideration, and thanks to Kisuke's genius, would probably be safe in case of war. The plan was simple. As soon as the Quincy struck, the Rukongai would, in its entirety, be transported to Hueco Mundo. There would of course be less strong Shinigami officers accompanying the civilians, as they would only be cannon fodder, no matter how much they had trained. They would also be more useful against the lesser hollows as well. And Vasto Lord usually kept to themselves, so it was a safe bet. The only Shinigami left would be those which had mstred their Shirkai or Bankai. Thankfully, due to the much improved training regime, that encompassed a good 500 Shinigami. As there were only 29 Quincy generals, they would be hard-pressed against the Shinigami task force without the army, which would be overpowered. Of course, the possibility of this plan failing was as big as it was of it working. Ichigo had warned them about the fact that many things could change due to his interference in the timeline. The captain-turned-politician had said that already there were many differences. Firstly, there was the matter of the Kurosaki clan. It seemed like Masaki Kurosaki, who had been Ichigo's mother in the past timeline, was currently single, and had taken the mantle as clan head of the Kurosakis. Not that it was an actual title, as there wasn't a clan. Instead, she lived with the Ishidas as the sister of Ryukin, and apparently worked as a doctor at their family hospital. On the matter of her powers, she seemed to be strongest of the lot, her blood vene already known to be the strongest seen in eons. Which led Kisuke to suspect that Ichigo himself had inherited more Quincy abilities than he was showing. The orange-haired man had admitted that he never even released the full extent of his Shinigami powers. And he sparred with both Jushiro and Shunsui on a regular basis, with both of them in their bankais. Yet, the man wasn't sure if he could defeat Juhabak when he attacked. It made Kisuke shiver in fear. The scientist brought himself out of his reverie. This was not the time to sit idly. He cleared his throat, bringing the attention to himself. Excuse me for the interruption, Suteicho, but the 12th Division have picked up some strange readings from various areas in Hueco Mundo, though they seem to be concentrated around the area of Las Noches, the castle of the Vasto Lord. That, coupled with the fact that there has been significant, drop in hollow activity these past couple of days, leads me to the conclusion that the Quincy are on the move. A thick layer of tension seemed to follow Kisuke's announcement. Yamamoto seemed to wait for it to sink in before he turned to Ichigo. How many days do you think we have left, Shiba Taicho? Ichigo seemed pensive as he answered, though it was hard to tell with his frown. I can't say for sure, any time between 2 days, hours, or minutes, to 2 months, or years, though I would say that it seems likely that we may be under attack sooner rather than later. The tension in the room seemed to be heavier. Kisuke spoke up curious about his reasoning. What makes you say that? Ichigo flashed a minuscule half-smile toward the scientist. I got a connection to the madman in my head, Kisuke. Though Yawatch is nothing like Juhabak, they still have the same pattern of thinking. And according to him, the Quincy's are going to strike soon. An awkward silence enveloped the room at the mention of the fact that in the end, it was Soul Society who had driven Juhabak to the extremes he was going to. Shunsui cleared his throat, trying to rid the awkwardness. Well, then we have to get ready, won't we? Why don't we take a day off training, so we can be more prepared for the actual fighting? It certainly did get rid of the awkwardness, but Shunsui was quickly shut down, or was about to get shut down by Yamamoto. Unfortunately, we can't put off the training and take a day off right before a war. Kuraka Taicho the Suteicho was suddenly cut off by an unlikely person. Actually, I agree with Shunsui. A day off would be good for everyone. And we have been preparing for the past century and a half. There isn't much we can do in a day. Yamamoto looked like he was going object, but sighed in defeat, muttering something suspiciously like, I'm too old for is. Very well, Shiba Taicho. But everyone is to be alerted, including the royal guard. Urahara Taishu, prepare the shifting of the Rukongai. Meeting adjourned. Shiba Mansion, following the meeting. The mood in the usually exuberant house of Shiba was a somber one. There were 5 of them in the dining room, Kukaku, Kaien, Ichigo, Isshin and Miyako. Miyako was Kaien's wife of 50 years, and his subordinate. She was a appealing woman who was deceptively strong, and her Shuunpa was almost on par with Yoruchi. The only reason she had joined the 13th Division was because of Kaien. Ichigo couldn't relate. Who would want to spend more time than absolutely necessary with his insane brother? Shuddering at the thought, the orange-haired man shifted his attention to his would-be father. Isshin had arrived shortly after the meeting. Apparently the Reo had sent him down to Siratii as extra help, meaning that he could only help when it was explicitly necessary. Ichigo thought that it would happen sooner rather than later. The orange-haired hybrid had a strange feeling towards the oncoming conflict. He felt restless. Like his very being was preparing itself for something. It was therefore that he'd supported Shuunsui's suggestion of taking a break. He wanted to speak with Shiro and Yawatch about this incredibly odd way his soul was behaving. And he wanted to talk to his family. During the 150 years Ichigo had spent here, he had grown extremely close to all those present in the room. Even though he'd only known Miyako for 50 of those. His relationship with Kyan was stronger than any other. His brother was exhausting at times, and generally behaved like an idiot, but he always managed to be there for Ichigo. Similarly with Isshin, he couldn't ask for more. Ever since the man found out that he was Ichigo's would-be dad, the man had tried his best to act like one. Ichigo often thought that this version of his father acted more like a father than the one who'd actually donated his SPRM. His relationship with Kakaku was somewhat rocky, though. The girl couldn't quite bring herself to forgive Ichigo for the fact that he'd lied about himself. Ichigo couldn't blame her for demanding the truth. After all, honesty was the trait of every real Shiba. Nevertheless, they were still close. The 5 of them were currently sharing tea, and talking about mundane things, trying to distract themselves from facing the possibility of losing a loved one. Ichigo sighed, bringing the attention of the occupants of the room to himself. The orange-haired man had been silent until now. Ichigo carded his fingers trough his hair, and smiled at his family, deciding to address the elephant in the room. The war approaches us at a rapid pace. We're here worrying about if some of us will die or not. You guys don't need to worry about that. I swear on my soul that I will do everything in my power to ensure the safety of our family. Now that the talk about our possible deaths is over with, why don't we enjoy our day off? The orange-haired man silently added Kurosaki Masaki in his promise, cause even though she had not borne him, she would always be his mother. Isshin snorted at Ichigo's nonchalance, and the mood finally became somewhat cheerful. Though they couldn't quite shake the feeling of finality Ichigo's statement had borne. Soon after, Ichigo excused himself. He needed to talk to his companions. Ichigo's chambers, Shiba Mansion. As soon as he entered his room, Ichigo headed for the bed. He lied down, and immediately entered his inner world. His companions were already waiting for him. What surprised him though, was the state of his inner world. The gray clouds were dispersing, leaving behind an oddly orange sun. Ichigo turned to Yawatch and Shiro and shot them a questioning look. He was met with silence. Then it finally dawned. Why his soul was acting so strangely. It was indeed preparing itself. The orange-haired man chuckled, though it was tinged with sadness. Ready for one last ride, Shiro, Asen? The hybrid asked with a smile. His companions answered, one more somberly than the other. Of course, Ichigo. TCH, king. What is a horse good for if he can't follow his king? Of course, you idiot. Ichigo's smile widened. He had all he needed. And he would do everything to protect his everything. His family. Elsewhere. On the throne of Las Noches sat a middle-aged man. He was seemingly sleeping, though. His companion knew it to be something else. His king was observing. Finally the Quincy king opened his eyes. The icy blue eyes were enough to instill fear in many a creatures. The servant suppressed a shiver. Amused eyes fell on him, and the servant blushed slightly. Get the Sternritters ready, Hashwolf. We are storming Siratii tomorrow. From tomorrow begins the just reign of Quincy's, and the end of the Shinigami. With that, the Quincy king went back to his sleep. Jugram Hashwolf stood for a moment, letting the order sink in, before he turned on his heel, heading for the main hall. The Shinigami better be prepared. After his servant left, the Quincy king opened his eyes. Though they seemed to be as impassive as ever, a very keen observer could see a sliver of frustration in them. What are you, Shiba Ichigo? Siratii. Once again, for the fourth, and hopefully the last, time in his life, Ichigo Kurosaki Shiba was getting ready to lead a war. The captain was floating in the air over Siratii, anticipating the arrival of the Quincy, and more specifically, Juhabak. He'd been doing so for the past 14 days, but a gut feeling told him that today was the day. The entirety of Soul Society was waiting for the inevitable attack. The people of Rukongai had been told an abbreviated version of the truth, and of their placement in Hueco Mundo. Luckily during the 100 years Ichigo had worked for the betterment of their living conditions had paid off, and the people trusted the Shinigami enough to not rebel. Suddenly Ichigo noticed a change in the air, and tensed. The orange-haired man sent a flare of Ryatsu to Kisuke, signaling that their guests were arriving. The scientist, who was already on high alert, leaped into action and turned on the process of moving the Rukongai. Within seconds the whole of Rukongai was transported to Hueco Mundo, and replaced with an illusion. By that time, there was a hole in the sky exuding a dark Ryatsu. Ichigo floated down to the ground, landing next to Kaien and Byakuya, both waiting anxiously for their guests. He didn't wait for long. Hundreds and thousands of Quincy's walked down from the hole in the sky. Exchanging one last grim look with Kaien and Byakuya, Ichigo left for the 1st Division barracks and readied himself. In his hand, Zangetsu thrummed eagerly, ready to tear the heavens asunder. War. Juhabak looked around him, smiling benignly to his children, eyes filled with cruel amusement, both at the blind trust of his children and the foolhardiness of the Shinigami. Really, a Seikiseki wasn't even worth a look from him, much less able to stop him. He gestured to Bambietta, a particularly amusing child with pyromaniac tendencies to destroy the annoyance. The girl eagerly jumped forward, much like a child in a candy store, eager to please and show off. Juhabaka's smile widened for a minuscule second. Bambietta concentrated a considerable amount of energy, before releasing it with a cackle of glee. The wall shook, but didn't fall. With a frown on her face, Bambietta repeated her action. This time, the wall fell. Bambietta grinned victoriously. Unfortunately for her and the rest of the Quincy's, the victory didn't last for long. As soon as the wall fell, the Vandendrake were rained with attacks of various kinds. An icicle pierced Bambietta, killing her instantly. The rest were attacked with innocent-looking sakura petals, who proved to be deadly knives, a barrage of actual knives, and some were drowned, taken by a sudden wave of water which had appeared from literally nowhere. Others were attacked by something which the Quincy identified as Kido. Not that it helped them as they were quickly annihilated. In the end, only 26 individuals known as the Stern Ritter, including Juhabak, stood, where there were previously thousands. The Quincy King's smile never faltered, though he was seething on the inside. He'd known that the Shinigami had been preparing for the war, but he hadn't anticipated that they would have been able to fell his children so quickly. At least his Stern Ritter were competent enough to save themselves, excluding Bambietta, that is. Besides, the Shinigami might not have realized it, but the more Quincy's they killed, the stronger Juhabak himself would get. And currently the Quincy King felt his energy grow 100 times stronger. He smirked, and applauded the Shinigami who were responsible of killing his children. Why, what a welcome! I hadn't thought you Soul Reapers would notice our arrival, but I seem to have been at fault. Though I must thank you for weeding out the weaker of my children. Though it makes for a slightly more interesting contest. His sparked disgust from the Shinigami, and fear in his remaining children's hearts. Juhabaka's smile turned sharp. How predictable of a monster to congratulate the executioners of his children. Byakuya responded, voice filled with disgust. Many of his companions, namely the captains and lieutenants of the Godai, excluding Ichigo and Yamamoto, nodded in agreement. The statement sparked outrage in the Stern Ritters. How dare you, a lowly Shinigami, insult His Highness? Who are you, anyway? The Stern Ritter known as Candace Catnip screeched. Byakuya raised an eyebrow in a way only a noble could. Condescendingly, mockingly. I am Kuchiki Byakuya, captain of the 6th Division, head of the Kuchiki clan, the raven-haired man said slowly, as if talking to a snorted. Candace flushed a bright fuchsia. Don't talk to me like that, you idiot. This time Byakuya raised both of his eyebrows. Apparently you have the mental capacity to understand my insult. Congratulations. Though your retorts could use some works. Candace launched herself at Byakuya, but the man shunpoed away, garnering looks of surprise from the Sternritters. Candace was known for being fast. Byakuya continued. And so could your aim. The Sternritters winced. Insulting a Quincy's aim was on top of the list of things people with a death wish do. Candace stilled for a minute, before smiling viciously. Byakuya felt a shiver down his spine. The atmosphere changed. Both the Quincy's and Shinigami readied themselves. You asked for it. With that the Sternritters attacked. The Shinigami responded. And with that the War of the Universe started. Siratii, Battleground. Shinji Hirako looked over the battlefield. What had once been the first district of Rukongai and the outer part of Siratii was now completely demolished. They'd been battling the Quincy's for what felt like hours, and both the Quincy's and the Shinigami were equally matched. Part of the reason for this was a warning from Ichigo. The Quincy could take their Bankais when they activated it. That meant that fighting them with their Shurikais tethering at the edge of Bankai was their only option. A job that was not easy. Rose had already had a few close calls, almost slipping into Bankai. The way Rose's opponent, Pranita's eyes had lit up as it had sensed Rose almost lost control was a confirmation of the hidden weapon of the Quincy's. Not to mention creepy, as Pranita was a hand with eyes. Shinji shuddered inwardly. Across him, Shinji could see Toshiro battling an overzealous Quincy, whose name was apparently as not. Shinji thought the name didn't fit the man, as he definitely was an but. He almost snorted aloud, but saved himself. Barely. The lieutenant of the 10th Division looked irritated. Shinji couldn't blame him. As Not was an arrogant idiot, and Toshiro could probably have taken out in 3 strikes had the Bankai been an option. Byakuya was still battling that Candace girl, and he too looked vaguely frustrated. Shinji couldn't blame him either. Candace was barely holding herself alive, and Byakuya looked almost bored. The girl would likely survive a head-on Shurikai attack, but a single strike with his Bankai would eviscerate her completely. The same could be said for Kaien. The Shiba was in a slight unease as his opponent seemed to have been one of the better ones. Apparently he could duplicate his opponent in fighting style. It was disturbing to watch 2 versions of the same person go after each other. The only ones who seemed to have fun were of course Kenpachi and Yachiru, wreaking havoc everywhere they breathed. Their opponents looked wary of them, but seemingly held their own against the dynamic duo. Kenpachi was the only one who had actually defeated an opponent, though it was no surprise. The man had only unlocked his Shurikai 50 years, with Ichigo's help, and even then it had almost outmatched every captain in terms of sheer. The fact that Ichigo had helped the man control that power and use it accordingly made him all the more terrifying. Another captain that surprisingly seemed to enjoy herself was Yoruchi. The goddess of Shunpa was flashing everywhere, cackling while leading her opponent, Basby on a merry chase all over Seoul society. Shinji almost felt sorry for the man. Almost. The Mohawk dude was irritating enough to deserve it. And from the look Sui Fong was shooting him, despite being rather busy with her own adversary a skin something, Baz was going to get it even more tough soon. Yukitake, Kiraku and Kisuk were nowhere in his sight. Neither were Juhabak and what seemed like his second-hand man. Not that Shinji missed them, but it was worrying. Shinji himself was fighting a rather lame man, Quill Jopi. As if the man's name wasn't idiotic enough, he had to have the lamest wasn't that he was stupid. It was the fact that his fashion sense clashed with his looks, which clashed with his tactically smart brain, which clashed with his flamboyance and sheer gayness. Not that Shinji had anything against gay people, but there was a limit to what he could take. And the fact that Shinji had a better fashion sense than Quilge was telling enough. Also the fact that the man's special power was to jail him was lame. Who wanted to be an overrated jailer, anyway? Shinji was tempted to kill himself just the sheer idiocy of his situation. All in all, the lieutenants and the captains of the Godii 13 were busy. He could see the captains becoming frustrated. And he could see why. The Quincy were strong. But with Bankai they would have been barely above an Ajunka's level hollow for them. The only reason that the captains hadn't given in, was because of Ichigo's training. And Shinji thanked every force in the universes for the hybrid's existence. Had it not been for the strawberry, they would have undoubtedly died. Several times over. Elsewhere Kisuke Urahara breathed a sigh of relief. He'd finally created the canceling device for the Bankai canceller. He'd dragged his opponent, some guy named Nanana, really, was that even a name, from the battlefield and into the 12th Division, where he defeated the Quincy with the help of his soldiers. After a search, they'd found the device Ichigo had described. It was simple enough to figure it out, but making a canceller wasn't as easy. The scientist breathed a sigh of relief as he shunpoed to the battlefield, frowning at the destruction. They would have a hell of cleaning up to do. And Kisuke hated cleaning. Deciding not to dwell on it, Kisuke hurried towards the center of the battlefield. Taking a deep breath, the scientist pulled out his device, and activated it. The effects were immediate. Something exploded in each and every Quincy's face. Their medallions. The attackers stopped in their respective activities, their shocked and surprised looks varying degree. Finally, a Quincy with a mohawk seemed to snap out of it. Who did that? My medallion. The rage on his face was frightening to anyone below lieutenant level. Which lost its effect as most of them were above lieutenant level. In fact, Kisuke saw Shinji roll his eyes. The captain of the 5th looked annoyed. Kisuke cleared his throat, bringing the attention of the proverbial to himself. Putting on a patented, mad scientist smile, Kisuke held up his canceller. Oh, you see, we received some information on the properties of your medallions. And we couldn't just let you take our Bankais, now could we? So I, being the helpful genius that I am, decided that a canceller was much needed. After all, we can't let you win, can we? There was a look of relief on every Shinigami's face when they heard that they could finally let loose. Bazz-B was looking faint. Byakuya sprung into action. Thank you, Captain Urahara. Now I can finally rid the world of this stain on the name of women. Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi. An explosion of pink deadly sakura petals enveloped the field. Kisuke sensed the rest of the Shinigami powering up as well. Within a couple of minutes, the Sternritters fell. Shinji landed next to Kisuke, powering down. The man sighed, looking slightly relieved and weary simultaneously. Well, that was frustrating and anticlimactic. Kisuke snorted. Byakuya landed next to them, having heard the comment. Actually, this was just the beginning. The real battle is undoubtedly going on near the 1st Division. You do remember that Ichigo told us that the more Quincy's we kill, the stronger Juhabak gets. And the man just received the biggest output of energy that he could have dreamed of. It was lucky none of them had the chance to activate their Volstanding. Come on. I have no doubt that Shunsui and Jushiro are fighting that man who followed his king. We must help to the best of our abilities. With that, the Kuchiki air shunpoed at lightning-fast speeds towards the center of Siratii. The rest of the captains followed soon after. They had a universe to protect. 1st Division Barracks. Jugram Hashwalth was breathing. And so was his enemy. Yukitake Jushiro was a tough opponent, not a surprise. Tough it did surprise him that the kindly man had gotten rid of his millennium-old sickness. And the fact that the white-haired man was giving him a hard time without activating his Bankai was another surprise. Though Jugram had hit equally hard, without his Volstanding. If the situation wasn't so dire, Jugram might have enjoyed the fight. Yukitake was an incredible fighter, using both his blades with such precision and control that he could barely hold up. As a result, he had several small cuts bleeding all over his body. Yukitake was in a similar position. As soon as he nicked or injured Hashwalth in some way or another, he was immediately paid back, sometimes with interest. Yukitake was still waiting for the signal that the Bankai stealing devices were eviscerated. After all, losing his Bankai would do no one any good. They continued to fight, both equally matched. The fight was taking place over the center of Siratii. A number of houses and mansions covered the ground under them, though most of them were demolished by the sidelines, that is from the top of roof. Kyoraku and Juhabak watched the fight while playing chess. Kyoraku watched with an expression of mild interest, though in reality he was watching every move closely. His protectiveness of his best friend would always be their sickness or not. In reality, he was supposed to be fighting Juhabak. And, in a way, he was. Kyoraku had always been one for mental battles rather than physical. And though he doubted he would win this one, it did beat having to undoubtedly unleash his Bankai before it was safe. Luckily for him, Juhabak was in no hurry. He may be insane, but Juhabak was a patient man. He knew that the Shinigamis were playing a waiting game. Waiting for what, he could guess. The Shinigamis were stronger than he'd anticipated. They would raise his Sternritters soon enough. And while the loss would harm his cause in some ways, it would lead him to win in the long run. The energy boost he would receive would further his already high energy levels to unimaginable heights. That would lead to a quick and easy death for the remaining Shinigamis. And the Ryu, weak as he was, would be an easy target. After all, what could the Royal Guard do to a much stronger and more or less god? Especially without their Bankais, they were weak as puppies. And as soon as he took his rightful place as god, he would resurrect his children. Suddenly the medallion on Jugram's chest exploded, and so did Juhabaka's. The king's eyes widened slightly. Someone had known about the medallions. But how? He was mentally connected to all his children, so there was no room for lies. But somehow, his hand had been shown. Yukitake and Jugram paused their fight as they sensed the upheaval in spiritual energy that had followed the explosion. Yukitake's eyes widened as he put two and two together. He recognized his fellow captains and vices powering up after the explosion of the medallion. That must mean that the Bankai Chancellors had been destroyed. Kyoraku had apparently come to the same conclusion, as he sat up with a groan. Ah, it seems like we have to postpone our chess match. Time to get serious it seems. Shunsui made a light grimace. Juhabak sent the man an amused and slightly unhinged smile. He was after all, receiving the energy of his strongest children. It was like getting drunk, only much, much better. Kyoraku shuddered internally. He never wanted to see that look on Juhabaka's face again. Ever. He seemed like he was an orgasm. It was disturbing. Sensing the arrival of the victors coming, Jugram and Jushiro broke up their fight, Jugram awaiting orders and Jushiro following the plan. Soon enough the captains and their vices were all assembled. Juhabak smiled mockingly. So the cavalry has arrived, though, I wonder, where is my dear friend Genryosai? Or for that matter, where is Kurosaki Ichigo? A wave of shock followed Juhabaka's question. How did the Quincy King know about the time traveler and his original name? However, they were spared the opportunity to answer as said time traveler appeared out of thin air, orange hair blowing in the wind. I am afraid Yamaji isn't joining us. Old age, you see. And I would say it was a pleasure to meet you, but I rarely lie. Kurosaki Ichigo at your service, though. Ichigo sent a smile towards Kaien, who smiled back. I prefer Shiba. Central 46, a couple of days before the invasion. Ichigo fought hard not to sigh in frustration. As expected the Central idiots had began running like headless chicken at the first mention that, for all intents and purposes, they were at war. Of course, it wasn't as bad as it could have been without Ichigo's influence, but still. Ichigo didn't want to deal with cowards who were only looking out for their own hide. Finally getting tired of the sulking and scared old farts, the orange-haired captain let loose a bit of his ryatsu, which brought the now quiet room's attention to himself. Ichigo took a deep breath. Are you done panicking? No. Well, guess what, it doesn't matter. Get over it. The Godai already have a plan which will, allow you to sit this one out. You'll be transported to Hueco Mundo along with the rest of the civilians. Don't worry, there will be Shinigami soldiers there to protect your miserable behinds. The Godai will deal with the Quincy's and clean your mess, as we always do. The insult seemed to have no impact, as they were used to it, but the old farts did calm down considerably, although they didn't look totally placated. Why haven't you called the Royal Guard? Are you that sure that you'll be able to stop them? One of the few women asked. Ichigo stared at her. The Royal Guard is there to guard the king, if you've indeed forgotten, Lady Miko. And we've been training for this for the past 150 years. We'll be just fine. As he said this, Ichigo could still feel some doubt. He braced himself. What exactly is the battle plan, Captain Shiba? We know from what you've told that the Quincy King gains power from the death of his children. How exactly do you plan to deal with that? Ichigo sent an appraising look towards the head of council for the actually competent question. Juhabak, as we know, is barely hanging on to sanity. In the previous timeline, we noticed that the more powerful he became, the more reckless his actions became, until he was completely gone. He was the most powerful man in the universes, yes, but he couldn't control that power. And the fact that he didn't realize how insane he was allowed us to take him down. So the plan is to kill the Vandendrake and the Sternritter except Hashwolf, and drive Juhabak insane with the power boost. Trust me, a powerful but insane Quincy King is far less dangerous than a sane and slightly less powerful one. Of course, it won't be easy, as he will be the strongest man in the universes, but it's our best bet. The head of council looked troubled by the answer, but seemed to accept it readily. A curious look overtook his wrinkly features. Why spare Hashwolf? The old man asked, causing Ichigo to smirk slightly. Killing Hashwolf would give some semblance of sanity back to Juhabak, as he is a genius several times over. We can't have that. Also, Hashwolf is already questioning his choice to follow Juhabak. The old man didn't seem satisfied. And after that? Ichigo shrugged carelessly. We kill him. Or imprison him. Siratii, battleground, where we left off. They were standing near Tsukiyuko Hill, and Ichigo thought that fate's sense of irony was shining through. After all, this was where it all started in many was for Ichigo, and today, it would end. Ichigo regarded Juhabak with a calmness he didn't actually feel. The orange-haired man was wary, and he knew that with the recent death of the Vandendrake, Juhabak would be as strong, if not stronger than him. But he was determined to fight, to protect every one of his friends until the last of his breath. The fact that Juhabak obviously knew something about him didn't matter to Ichigo. The past rarely mattered when you were trying to save the universe. But it did pique his interest for how much the Quincy King knew. Regardless, there were other things that needed to be taken care of. With that thought in mind, the orange-haired man shunpoed towards the clique of captains and vice-captains that were standing on the hill. Nodding in greeting, he explained what they needed to do. You guys must distract Hashwolf until I've killed Juhabak. Don't kill him, cause it will make things worse. Distract him, imprison him. But don't kill him. Not until the black-haired mustachio is dead. The orange-haired man impressed upon his peers, ignoring the various snorts that escaped them when they heard the designated nickname of Soul Society's worst enemy since Central Ichigo swore he heard Yawuch grumbling about that comment as Shiro moment of humor was broken by. Said Mustachio clearing his throat. I am hurt, my dear friends. I return after so long, and you won't even notice me. Speaking of old friends, where is Shigekuni? I thought he would be leading his soldier from the front, like a good general. The Quincy King called out in a mocking tone. Several of the captains, especially the old ones, hissed. Ichigo narrowed his one disrespected Yamaji except him. And maybe Kyoraku, but that was beside the point, as the eccentric captain looked as enraged as Ichigo. though he hid it behind a sharp smile. The tension increased tenfold. Ichigo took that as a sign. Giving a lasting look to his peers, he smiled one last time before he shunpoed in the air so he could meet his nemesis. Juhabak raised an eyebrow in mocking askance, though he seemed to be scanning Ichigo calculatingly. Ichigo took a deep breath, and smirked. The Suteicho is occupied with something. I'm sure if he deemed you dangerous enough, he'd come along. So it seems like you're stuck with me as your opponent. Juhabak's eyes narrowed marginally, and his mocking smile became sharp. The Quincy King's Ryatsu flared dangerously, with enough force to send several lieutenants down. Even the captains were struggling. Except Shunsui, that is. You have quite the mouth on you, Shinigami, or is it Quincy? You are a hybrid after all. And like all mutts, you bark more than you bite. Very well, I will indulge you in a fight. Hashwaltha's eyes widened. He needed to get out of there, lest he be killed in the crossfire. The blonde Quincy hyunkyaku'd away. Seeing this, the captains made to follow him. Ichigo, who had been waiting for them to leave, heaved a sigh of relief, before finally turning his attention back to the Quincy King. The orange-haired man hadn't wanted his friends to become so affected of the Ryatsu that they be crushed. So he'd waited for them to make good distance between them and the two titans of power. Ichigo let his tight hold on his Ryatsu loose. It seemed like a dam had been broken, such was the force, before it finally settled down. Somewhere else, Shunsui whistled, impressed. He knew Ichigo was unreleased, but he could probably have taken Yamamoto down in Bankai with that power. Byakuya sighed, exasperated with his friend's need for theatrics. Meanwhile, Juhabak had lost the smile in his face. The power-hungry mustachio was aware of the fact that the orange-haired pretty boy was powerful. But this exceeded his expectations a little too much for his liking. The Quincy King had been looking forward to a good fight, one he knew he would win, but this was gearing towards a bloody, brutal, battle. Ichigo smirked once again. Surprised? As you said, I am a hybrid. The hybrid, if you will. The perfect blend of Quincy, Shinigami, and Hollow. But I thought you already knew that. Ichigo said, casually mocking the would-be emperor. He knew that Juhabak wasn't completely insane yet. So pushing his buttons to speed up the process was his tactic. And if he was enjoying it a little too much, it wouldn't hurt anybody. Juhabak, on the other hand, was grinding his teeth. The impudent brat. Using his own words against him to make him look stupid. But something the brat said caught his attention. A Hollow Quincy Shinigami hybrid? Then you're a truly sad individual, falling so far as to incorporate hollow powers into your own. And what good will it be, when I win and you lose? Juhabak said in a similar mocking tone. In response, Ichigo just raised an eyebrow. It seemed like Juhabak didn't know that much about Ichigo after all. And it was a testament to his insanity that he let it slip so easily. Ichigo fell into a stance. It's truly sad that you don't even realize what you're facing. Let's get this party started. With that, the hybrid flared his Ryatsu, and unleashed his full Shurikai. Tear the heavens asunder, Zangetsu. Immediately, Black Ryatsu unleashed itself on the whole of Siratii. The sunlight seemed to dim, and an oppressive Ryatsu weighed down on the few Shinigamis still in the city, almost choking them to death, before it suddenly seemed to vanish. Juhabaka's eyes widened, surprised to see such an exhibition of power from the young captain. Elsewhere, the captains heaved a relieved sigh in trepidation, realizing that Ichigo had just entered transcendent levels of powers. They hadn't had much trouble subduing Hashwalth, as he was already worn out from his fight with Yucatake, and the combined forces of the captains hadn't had to do much. And now they had a blonde Ponce secured in Bakudo of level 100, thanks to Kisuke Urahara. The Quincy wouldn't be able to escape even if he tried. Besides, it seemed like Hashwalth was more interested in the fight between Mustachio and Strawberry than anything else. Meanwhile, the two fighters in question still hadn't made a move. Juhabak knew that his opponent wanted to be taken lightly, and from the release right now, it seemed like he hadn't even released his Bankai yet. Juhabak released a put upon Sai. If you insist. With that, the Quincy King fully released his Ryatsu, easily matching Ichigo. The city was flooded with light from Juhabaka's Ryatsu, and where Ichigo's Ryatsu had dimmed the sky, the Quincy King's brightened it up. From the captain's vantage point, they could see that where Ichigo stood, he seemed to be darkness, and from where Juhabak stood, he radiated an unholy light. The light and dark seemed to clash at a point in the middle of the two pseudo-gods, and created a truly spectacular sight. The Quincy King drew his Shili Snyder, transforming it to a sword. For a while all stood still. And then, simultaneously, the two beacons of power attacked, meeting each other midway. The moment their swords crossed, a shockwave of energy went through the whole of Soul Society. The remaining city of Siratii was completely destroyed as a result, and the remaining Shinigami fled before they could be cannon fodder. A flash of annoyance flitted across Juhabaka's face as he saw that the strawberry had blocked him with his trench knife, and somehow managed to break Juhabaka's impromptu sword. Before the young captain could capitalize on it, the Quincy Flash stepped away. Ichigo smirked mockingly, and Juhabaka could see something hollow-like in his expression. Close combat too difficult for you, mustache man? Juhabaka almost gaped before he pulled himself together. Now the kid had done it. Smiling sharply, he readied himself for the next attack. Manifesting his largest bow, he let loose a barrage of arrows, before using an ancient technique he'd created specifically to fight Shinigamis. Sankt Bogen. The enormous arrows were traveling at lightning speeds towards the Shinigami, who'd been casually dodging every arrow of Juhabaka's until now. The orange-haired man's eyes widened, before he flash-stepped, evading almost every one of the arrows. Almost. One arrow which had been significantly faster than the rest, caught Ichigo unaware and struck him in the middle of his stomach, and pinning him to a mountain wall, which was miles away. Juhabaka smiled a cruel smile. Grabbing one of the arrows of the bogan, he turned it to a broadsword, fit to fight a Shinigami. Not that he was sure that this particular brat had more fight in him. The Quincy King flash-stepped towards the mountain, reaching it in seconds. The cruel smile had never left his face as he took in the state of enemy. Kurosaki was gasping in pain, understandably, as his arrow had made a big hole through his stomach. Juhabaka was surprised that his torso was still clinging to the rest of his body. Or the fact that he hadn't passed out because of blood loss. Was that all? I must say I am disappointed. Juhabaka cut himself off as he saw what the Shinigami was doing. The imbecile was pulling out his arrow, almost easily. Then, as soon as the arrow was out, the sea trough hole almost immediately knitted itself back. It was as if he had never been injured in the first place. Juhabaka sensed for a drop in Ryatsu, and sensed none. Ichigo cracked his neck. You were saying something. Juhabaka blinked owlishly, before falling into stance. Bloody hybrids, he muttered. And then they were off again, belting out blows that would have killed an average captain many times over. Ichigo jumped into the air. Getsuga Tensho, the black wave of energy traveled towards Juhabaka, who dodged by leaping into the air. But he once again underestimated Ichigo, as he was suddenly attacked from behind. Not being able to react in time, he took a full force of a Getsuga in his face. Ichigo didn't wait for him to recover, as he flipped and used his sword in a straight cut to his head, which Juhabaka blocked. And retaliated with a cut to Ichigo's ribs, which the Shinigami barely evaded. Juhabaka jumped back to catch his breath. He had to end this. They were both equally matched, and both were still holding back. Apparently the strawberry had the same idea, as his Ryatsu, which only Juhabaka was able to sense, skyrocketed. Tensa Zengetsu. Another rush of black Ryatsu encompassed the sky, and when the orange-haired man reappeared, he was holding two large kyber knives. His hair was flying around him, and he had 2 horns growing from his head. With a slightly deranged smile, Johobok powered up as well. Unlike his children, he didn't have a Volstanding, as such a thing was beneath him, but he did have a power-up. A light encompassed the whole of Siratii once again, as the Quincy King powered up. And he knew no more. Because he was finished, he looked very much the same, if you overlooked the enormous bow, and the slightly younger appearance. The Quincy King sent out his Ryatsu, which destroyed everything in its path, before finally opening his eyes. They were totally irisless, and by the expression he was wearing, the ploy to drive him insane with power had worked. Ichigo's own eyes, which were gold, scanned the man before him. He'd have to finish this soon. The man before him was a loose cannon. And Ichigo had to mute it. He began charging up for a final attack. Sensing an enemy, the Berserk King turned towards Ichigo. Letting loose a roar of rage, he charged up for an attack. Ichigo's eyes widened when he sensed the power of the attack. A sad smile of acceptance overcame his features. Sorry, Kaion. I don't think I'll be able to make it. With a deep breath, he charged his attack with all he had. And the 2 gods let loose their final attacks. A black wave of power headed at sonic speed towards the Quincy King. An enormous arrow made its way towards Ichigo. They both struck their marks, and a huge explosion encompassed the whole of Soul Society. Kaion was waiting anxiously for the air to clear. And once it did, his eyes widened in horror. No. Because in front of him, the Quincy Emperor's corpse laid. And on the other side, his brother's bloody, lifeless body laid. Division Barracks, 5 years later. Rukia Inazuri stared at the man in front of her with complete adoration and respect. He was her sensei of 4 years, and even though he was rough around the edges, he had always ensured that she learned. He was rude, and insulted her when she couldn't do one particular technique correctly, or stepped a toe out of line, which, considering her upbringing among the 78th district slums, happened quite often. His favorite insult, she'd learned, was, dunderheaded midget. Normally, Rukia would beat someone up if they called her something similar, and inform them that no, it wasn't she who was small, but they who were freakishly tall, followed by a good kick to the face. But, unfortunately, she couldn't do that to her sensei, as he was her superior, and would likely be able to kill her before she even contemplated to do such a thing. Her mentor was powerful, said to be one of the strongest shinigamis in existence after all. And Rukia wouldn't trade him for another for all in the universes. He was like the big brother she'd always wanted, even though she'd had Rinji. But since Rinji was an idiot, he was immediately disqualified. She was aware that she had some kind of worship complex for her mentor, but thankfully she wasn't as far gone as Kaion and Sentaro. Rukia shivered. Those two would be the death of her mentor, with their unneeded overprotectiveness and over-enthusiasm about everything their mentor did. She swore she'd heard them complimenting his breathing techniques once. It was lucky that their mentor's wife was understanding and even seemed to gather some kind of amusement from the way the Sentaro and Kaion behaved. Yes, her mentor Kaion Shiba was all she could have asked for. The scowling man, who was seemingly in a state of constant irritation, was truly a remarkable individual. Though she'd heard from her seniors that Kaion hadn't always been like this. Apparently, her temperamental sensei had been an easygoing, happy-go-lucky guy until the great battle 5 years ago. At first, she'd scoffed at the mere idea. The guy who hadn't smiled since she met him 4 years ago, easygoing. But then she discovered that Kaion had experienced a terrible tragedy on the day of the battle. His brother, Ichigo Shiba, had been gravely injured, and fallen into a deep coma. One he had yet to wake up from. Rukia couldn't help but feel resentful towards Ichigo. Why had he been so weak as to fall for some spineless Quincy's trick to be so injured? Didn't he think of Kaion before recklessly threw himself into mortal peril? Didn't he realize how much he was hurting Kaion, and the rest of the Shiba clan? So yes, Rukia disliked Ichigo very much. Today was the annual festival celebrated on the anniversary of the Great Battle. Everybody was mingling, and having a blast, everybody except Kyan, that is. He seemed distraught. Of course, he interacted with the various nobles as any respectable head of family would, but Rukia could see that he was just being courteous as to not start a feud. Finally, barely half an hour into the celebrations, Kyan excused himself. Rukia narrowed her eyes. No doubt, he was going to visit that good-for-nothing brother of his. She knew that Ichigo had a room for himself at the 4th Division barracks, though not exactly where, and that Kyan often spent sleepless nights sitting beside the vegetable. With a determined look on her face, Rukia decided that it was time to confront her mentor's brother. And she'd followed Kyan to the 4th Division barracks. At first she'd been apprehensive of Kyan finding out, but the man had been so preoccupied that he'd missed Rukia completely. Which was now the reason for the small Shinigami to be hiding in the shadows of Ichigo's hospital room, staring at the still form of her mentor. She couldn't see Ichigo's face from her vantage point, but as that was sure to be an unpleasant sight, she didn't mind it overly much. A sudden movement snapped her attention back to the situation at hand. Kyan held his brother's hand, breathing deeply. Rukia shifted uncomfortably, not liking to have invaded Kyan's privacy. It's been 5 years. Ichigo. 5 long years, and I hurt every second, knowing that I won't be able to help, that I have to wait for Ryu knows how long. Kyan's voice was shaky, but there was no reaction from his brother. Kyan plowed on, as if used to this. Rukia's heart broke when she saw tears in her mentor's eyes, and her dislike for Ichigo quadrupled in that second. How dare he do such a thing to Kyan? You know, Retsu-san says that you can hear us. And I believe her. But why.do I have to wait so long. To respond, tears were streaming down his face now, and Rukia felt herself tearing up at the sight of her powerful mentor's state. Kyan seemed to struggle for control, and he let out a shaky breath. But I'll wait. I know you'll be back. 'Cause you're a Shiba. 'Cause you're more stubborn than I ever could be. 'Cause you're Ichigo. The one who protects. I'll always be here. Just hurry up, would ya? Shinji's been making fun of me since I've been more like you, I suppose, scowling and strict. And responsible. This, Kyan let out a laugh. He stayed quiet for a while, before he sighed and moved towards the door. See ya, Ichigo, he said, smiling a wistful smile before he left. Rukia waited for him to leave the building, before she turned towards Ichigo with fire in her eyes. She gasped in slight surprise when she saw him. He was ethereal. With orange hair that had been braided and laid over his shoulder, glowing skin, and a face nearly identical to Kyan, he struck an impressive sight, something that should have been impossible for a man who'd been lounging on the bed for the past 5 years. Snapping out of her ogling, Rukia glared. You are a despicable idiot who doesn't deserve to have a sibling like Kyan-sama. Don't you realize what you're doing? You're killing him. He doesn't smile, doesn't play around like I'm told he once did, and he's so sad. Truthfully, I don't understand why everybody in the Shiba clan doesn't hate you for doing this to their head of family. Rukia took a deep breath. I don't know you, and frankly, I don't care about you. But Kyan-sama does, and you have to wake up. Before he gets delusional, or goes crazy. Rukia paused, letting out a soft sigh. He's slipping, you know. I saw him pouring tea into the vases once, and I asked him what he was doing. He just looked at me like I was the mad one, and told me that he was watering the plants. Do you the best part? The vases were empty. Rukia paused again, breathing deeply. Look, I don't care that you're a vegetable. I don't care how this happened. But you're important to Kyan-sama. And for that, you need to wake up, she screamed at the man, breathing heavily. Still, there was no reaction. Rukia let out a frustrated sound. Finally deciding that talking to someone who couldn't respond wasn't going to do any good for her mental health. I hope you're happy with yourself, she growled, before walking out, slamming the door behind her. In his room, alone from everybody at last, Ichigo's mouth twitched in amusement. That was the first movement. A frown marred his face as he struggled to move his muscles. Finally, he managed to open his eyes. A smirk graced his lips. Trust Rukia to kick his butt into gear. The surprised look on Kyan's face when he showed up in the Shiba mansion was one to savor. And if the bone crushing was reciprocated by equal force, none of the brothers said anything. And at Kyan's wondering query of how his answer was simple. You needed me. More than ever. Apparently, you were going around watering empty vases with tea. The mortification woke me up. Rukia was wary. Kyan-sama looked to be on cloud 9. Which shouldn't be possible as of 2 days ago. He seemed like a totally different person. She'd gone to Yucatec Taicho with her concerns. But the kind captain had looked slightly amused as he explained to Rukia that this was how Kyan used to be. That left her confused. Why would her mentor, who she knew to be a scowling, but kind teacher, be such a goofy idiot? There was no way that wasn't an act. Obviously Kyan-sama, kind person that he was, didn't want anyone to worry. Yes, that must be the case. But then she saw Kachiki Taicho look at her mentor and only smile. She was confused. Kachiki Taicho wasn't afraid to call anyone out on their sheet. Why would he put up with this? But later, when she saw Miyako-sama, she saw that she too looked happy. Then it dawned on her. Obviously Miyako-sama was PRGNNT. And of course Kyan-sama was going to be happy to be a dad. Chastising herself for not congratulating her mentor, she quickly left to find him. On her way, she heard some people talking. Did you hear? Toshiro Taicho has been demoted to Fukutecho again. Matsumoto-san looked positively orgasmic when she was demoted to third seat again. Rukia paused. That couldn't be right, even if it did sound like Matsumoto-san. What? Why? Someone exclaimed. It's true. They say that the old Taicho has returned. Really? I wonder how powerful he must be. Well, they say he trained Toshiro Taicho, so pretty powerful, I bet. Rukia shook her head. People would listen to anyone these days. Resuming her walk, she found her mentor. He was laughing like he didn't have a care in the world, holding on to a bowl of sake alongside Shinji and Urahara Taicho. He seemed to notice her, just as she was to make her presence known. Ah! Rukia! What brings you here? The merry man asked. Rukia cleared her throat. Well, I came to congratulate you, of course. Kyan laughed. So you've heard? I couldn't have thanked the Ryu enough even if I had a lifetime. My brother finally waking up after such a long time. Rukia, who'd been growing more confident, suddenly lost it. I what? Your brother? She asked, clearly confused. Yes. His brother, a smooth baritone answered from behind her. Rukia turned around, first noticing the Haori of the Taicho of 10th Division. Only it wasn't Toshiro-san. It was Ichigo Shiba. Who was looking far too amused. You're a captain, she said faintly. He raised an eyebrow. Yes, he said slowly. An awkward silence descended. Did you really train Toshiro Fukutecho? Rukia asked, not really sure why she did. Shiba. Taicho only looked more amused. Yes, I did. And the rest of the elites who have control of their bankai, of course, chipped Kyan-sama in a proud tone. Shiba Taicho rolled his eyes, and an all too familiar scowl settled upon his features. Rukia did what any sane person would do. She kicked him in the shin. Ow! Whatever was that for midget? The orange-haired man hissed. If you dare put Kyan-sama through that again, I swear to the Ryu, I will murder you. And don't call me midget. With a final kick to his shin, making him hiss again, she walked out, but not after politely nodding to the hysterically laughing Shinji in Urahara Taicho, and Kaien-sama. She only barely got to her room before she fainted of shock and embarrassment.